Welcome, everybody, to episode 31 of the Legacy Driven Marriages podcast. As always, it's time to get into the marriage arena. It's time to have some dang fun. It's time to have real, raw, candid conversations. And as always, the reason we're here is to strengthen our relationships. And so I'm your host, Walt McKinley. And as always, I'm here with my beautiful partner in crime, Stephanie McKinley.
Hey, everybody.
Man, as we get started today, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode. Today, we're talking about something that we all have, something that is a relationship killer and frankly is a self-killer too. We're talking about expectations, something that massively changes, and 99.99999% doesn't change it for the better, our relationships. You know, what's interesting is when we were doing some research for this episode, Stephanie found that a recent study showed that missed expectations is responsible for 45% of marital problems. 45%, that's wild. I can't say that it's surprising because we've been married 24 years and we've had expectations. And
well, it was 45% of divorcees that they surveyed about divorce. And they said in 45% of the survey, people taking the survey said that expectations was a major factor in why they were divorced.
And let's be real, you got to be honest with yourself. You have them of yourself, you have them of your spouse. They're in so many facets of our life, so many different areas of our life. And to me, expectations have always been rooted in an absolute mindset. And that's why expectations, all they do is disappoint. Whether it's expectations of what you think you should do or expectations of what, in this case, you think your spouse should do, your partner should do.
Well, I think in expectations, it's we assume when we have an expectation, we're assuming something, and you know what happens when you assume.
Everybody knows, but for people who maybe haven't heard it, because it's a little bit more old school, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me, and that's how you spell assume. So if you didn't know, now you know.
And to me, that's what expectations are. They're assumptions, really.
Yes. And to me, expectations, for me anyway, personally, I know when we struggle in our relationship the most, and we're going to really jump into this quickly today because we got a lot of ground to cover. When we struggled the most, it was really expectations, and it led to unrealistic thoughts of what you should or shouldn't do in our relationship, what should or shouldn't be happening, what the outcome is. And it led to us struggling in our relationship as both of us had those expectations.
Well, let's be real. We all have them, and they're not necessarily bad. It's just they have to be communicated.
Right.
And that's what I mean about, like, this is what happens in the breakdown in marriages is when we have expectations, we're assuming that our partner knows our expectations, but a lot of times we don't voice them. They're just assumed or expected because of our environment or how we grew up, or something shaped us to feel that we should expect that. And then we project that on our partner without ever actually communicating it to them. And then we get upset when they don't meet our expectations, but we never actually told them we had this expectation. We just assumed they knew.
Well, I think about it even from the perspective, and back when this was still the Legacy Warrior podcast, we actually did a whole episode on expectations as it refers to yourself. Expectations that you're going to get a promotion and then you don't get it. And it's this total letdown where it actually hurts your own development for a minute, maybe for a month, maybe for a long time, where you don't end up maxing out who you are because you just start to have these expectations that aren't being met. You get disappointed. You stop trying so hard. Apathy creeps in, and all of these other things that lead you to not trying as hard as you should and not being the best version of you. Well, the same thing is relevant in relationships. And that's why we wanted to talk about it today, because we have, and look, you can't go 26 years together and 24 years of being married without having some tough moments where you really had to have candid and raw conversation and lay all your feelings on the line to decide whether or not you're going to fight for your relationship. That's why we wear the warrior shirts, because you have to fight together. You've got to get in that relationship arena together. And limiting your expectations, managing your expectations, and not letting them be expectations, but maybe more hopes of what you think can happen are huge. And we're going to start to cover, I just at the beginning of this, Steph, I want to let you jump in. At the beginning of this, we're just going to cover expectations that are happening in marriages and relationships. And then we're going to talk about how to solve them towards the end of this. And how do you really move from expectations into hopes and dreams, but doing it together and moving forward together to have fruitfulness in your relationship, instead of a barren tree where you're just going to get divorced because you're so disappointed in everything that's happening.
Yeah. So we saw this quote and it really hit home because, and this is what it says. It says, the thing with expectations is that we usually don't even realize we have them until they are not met. Let that sink in for a minute, because that's what I'm saying is expectations are just something that we just tend to feel, and it's never really said out loud what it is. It's just, you just feel they should do that. And, so
it's those implicit expectations versus the explicit ones, right?
So, like, the biggest thing I can say is that we're not mind readers. No one's a mind reader. So you may be thinking these things in your head and then thinking like, oh, my spouse should just know that because it's just assumed. Like, that's what a man does, or that's what a woman does. Like, but where did that come from? That came from our environment. That came from how we grew up. Like, we're being shaped by these outside things that had nothing to do with our partner, but we hold them to these expectations that they don't even know we're holding them to. And that's where it gets dangerous. And we learned the hard way. I can definitely tell you this. I think this is one of the biggest things that it's one of my favorite topics, because I think it's the biggest lesson I learned from our marriage. And when we got to the part of our marriage where we were really struggling, I realized that a lot of it came down to these expectations that were not communicated. They just were assumed. And then we felt disappointed and resentment built. And I know that I always say it's like a relationship killer, because it's kind of like a relationship silent killer, because you don't even realize that that's what you're doing. You don't even realize that you have these expectations until they aren't met.
Well, even when you communicate them, because we went through a period in this season in our marriage where we had expectations. We weren't really compromising with each other with those expectations. And then it became a very transactional relationship where it was like, okay, well, if you do this and you meet my expectation, then I'll do this.
Yes.
If you do this.
And this is where it leads to the transactional relationship, because that's how you start getting petty then. Like, well, he didn't do that, or she didn't do that, so I'm not going to do this. Or like he just said, or if they do it, then I'll do this. Mm-hmm. And that's how we get there, is because of these expectations we have.
It's funny you said petty. And I want you to tell the story because it's funny to me how you fold towels. And we're going to give a couple funny examples before we really jump in. But this is how petty relationships get when it's full of expectations and that drip of resentment that turns into a fire hose. Like, tell them about the towel.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say this. This is one of just a small example of an expectation that I had. Well, this was probably early in our relationship, I'm assuming, because
this might have been before we got married, even like real early in our relationship. I feel like,
yeah, I think it was before we got married, but we were living together.
Yeah,
we were living together first before we got married, and in that time, so we were both working outside the house, and so we were trying to share household duties. And so when it came time for him to do the laundry, and I saw how he folded the laundry, I'm very particular about it. I'm OCD about this stuff. So I'm like, I line everything up, and there's a certain way that I fold it that I feel like makes them less wrinkled. And when I see someone kind of just, I don't know, to me, it looks sloppy, or like it's just not the way I would fold it, I can't help it. I have to fix it. I'll change it.
Just for the record, it was all lined up and I folded them very nice. I just didn't do the little trifold thing Steph be doing to make them look extra pretty. But nobody was getting wrinkled towels after I folded them.
So I have to say, so then he would see me refold it. Well, then he'd get really mad. Like, why are you redoing something I already did? And he just couldn't reason why I would do that. And, and I can't explain it. I was just like, I don't know, this is just the way I like it. And so instead of expecting that he's going to fold it the way I like it and the way I want it, which I know is not going to happen, it's not realistic to think that he's going to do that, I just decided I will fold the towels because I want it done this way. So I will just do it. And I won't have that expectation of him so that I don't feel disappointed when he doesn't do it the way I want. Because how ridiculous does that sound? Like, he's not folding it the way I want it. Right? Like, so
Yeah.
there's no
What
right way to fold a towel.
was the expectation for me to help do laundry, or was the
Right.
expectation unrealistic that it has to be perfectly folded with the tri-fold, put in the closet in the same way? Or you hear couples argue over which way the toilet paper roll goes.
Oh, yeah.
Which, by the way, it's always over the top. I'm pretty sure we aligned on that pretty early.
Must have taught you well.
But really, when we got together, I'm like, "What are you? Why are you tripping? Like, I put toilet paper on the roll. It ain't like I left it empty." And she's like, "Well, it's got to be over the top because when you pull it." So in that instance, I'm like, "Whatever. I'll put it over the top. It's not that big of a deal." But those petty things, Steph, those petty things that we can laugh about now weren't funny.
Right, but you really got upset that I refolded the towels, but I had to explain where I was coming from because he doesn't understand. We don't think the same way on that. And this happens all the time because men and women especially, we think really differently about things.
Mhm.
This is I just quickly I'm going to say this is like we expect something to be like let's say two people watch the same fireworks display, right? And one of them could be like, "Oh my gosh, this is the best the best fireworks I've ever seen. They were so big, there were so many." And then the same person or, another person could have watched the same display and be like, "That was lame. I've seen way better display than that." And the same, like two people are watching the same thing at the same time and could have a totally different view of how that was
Because their
because it's based and it's based on their previous experiences. And that's how everything that we come across in life is we're being shaped by our previous experiences. So remember that as we go through these expectations is think about your partner and you and how did your partner grow up? What was their family life like? What was yours like? What did they experience before you got into your relationship? Because these things are what's shaping how they see something versus how you see it.
Yeah, and understand, like, how cool is it for there to be differences in that? How boring would it be if you just thought the same exact way as your spouse and everything was perfectly aligned all the time? The growth we experience as human beings, especially in relationships, that opposite attracts. For Stephanie and I can't tell you the amount of growth both of us have had individually because we partner together. And those seasons where we didn't partner together really are the reason that we do this podcast. Those tough seasons and that struggle that we had, and giving you the belief you can make it through the struggle. But so as we go through this, I want you to think about where are your partner's expectations rooted, but I also want you to think about where are your expectations rooted and be really honest with yourself. And then we're going to give some solutions towards the end of this that'll really allow some dialogue and some conversations to move you past expectations. Again, your hopes and dreams don't change, but to allow you to partner together in a different way where you fast forward your relationship instead of keeping it in a position where maybe it's stuck in one of these 12 areas that we're going to go over.
Okay, so this is the most common marriage areas of expectations, and then we're going to shift to the solutions. So there's 12 of these. So we're going to try to go through these pretty quickly. The first one we run into is money. And if you guys have been following us, or if you haven't, our last episode 30, was on this very thing. It was on finances in your relationship. And this was what we talked about was like being a spender versus a saver. Do you have individual or joint bank accounts? That's the kind of stuff like you have to discuss going into the relationship before it becomes an issue. Like kind of sort these things out with your partner in advance so that you don't expect that it's going to be one way and find out that's not what they thought. And it will save you a lot of arguments. Even down to like who does the bills, who, how are you going to budget your money? Where is your money going to, the different bills, like all of that stuff has to be discussed in your relationship. And
yeah, is the woman, she wants the Barbie dream house and the dude's a country boy and he just wants an unpaved driveway leading to a 2-bedroom 1-bathroom home in the middle of the country with 10 acres. Like, you got to align those things because we're all different when it comes to that. And I wanted to take the second one, so I was glad you took the first one, because the second one is like sex and romance and affection. Man, ladies, look, men are programmed. We hunger for sex. It's part of our DNA. It's literally what makes us. We need it, and so women don't really think the same way as that. And so I saw a meme the other day, and it was, I don't know, I just thought it was super funny, or a little quick real video. And it's got the guy with his blanket. If you're watching on YouTube, you can kind of see my face. But this guy got the guy with the blanket. And it's like just below his eyes. And it's bedtime, obviously. And the guy's like, me waiting for my wife to, have sex to initiate. And he's like, and he points the camera at her, and he's like, her over here laughing at TikTok. And do you know why? Because when it's bedtime, men are like, well, it's bedtime, hey, what's up, girl? But the woman, they're not programmed the same way, right? Normally. And maybe the high sex drive person is different than what I'm saying. And so make this apply to you. So the other person's they're not even thinking about it, but we've got this implicit expectation that our spouse is going to initiate or, hey, what are you wearing to bed tonight? Men are like, lingerie, girl, boom, here you go. And women are like, I'm just trying to get in the cozy fuzzy thing that, full pants and full shirt and maybe even some socks. And it's funny, I used to tell Steph, oh, you came to bed.
I want to be comfortable.
Remember, I used to be like, oh, you coming to bed with body armor on? Right? Because our expectations of what we want from the other person is different. Steph just wanted to be comfortable, and I just wanted her to be naked, and it was going to be good, right? Our expectations weren't the same. So in those moments, really, what you should do is turn to your spouse and say, hey, like, can we, maybe have some boom boom. That's what we call it in our house. But sex and romance and affection, what does one person want? PDA, public displays of affection, the other one doesn't. Does one person like their back tickled and the other one doesn't? Does one person just want to cuddle without thinking that they have to have sex just because they cuddled? And the other one wants to have sex because they cuddled. It's the communication in that aspect, which you need to really have with all of these, man. But this one's huge because we have seen a lot of couples really struggle because they're not willing to have that uncomfortable conversation in order to move into a comfortable place in their relationship. And I don't know about you, I'd rather have the conversation. And we learn this the hard way by not having it. So we have conversations way early before resentment ever builds in all these categories that we're going to go through. Because each season of our life, it changes and it evolves, and what we want and what we need changes along with it. So make sure you're having that conversation around sex and romance and affection and intimacy.
Yeah, next is in-laws and extended family. So Walt and I didn't really have this issue because we were a military family. We moved all around. And so both of us were away from our families for the most part. And we're from two different coasts. So we either were on one coast where we were near one or near the other. So most of the time we didn't have to figure out how to share. But I know there's a lot of you who maybe you live in town with all of your relatives and family, and you have to divide this time with them, and then I've seen people some people have their family very involved in their, either they have a parent living with them or they're just very involved in your life.
Or super vocal parents that always got an opinion.
Yes, we all know some of them where they try to tell you how to parent. So this is something that you really kind of got to discuss about, what's reasonable about how involved they are. We saw an extreme example of a couple where her family was like going on every vacation with them, and the husband just wanted alone time with his wife, but their family was always right there, and that's definitely going to come in between you guys. So you have to compromise on who's how much time you're going to spend with them, when you're going to spend that time with them. Definitely make time for just you as a couple.
Boundaries.
Yeah. What else? Did I miss anything? Let's see. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about dividing the holidays and that kind of stuff too.
I think the next thing is kids. Oh man, there's kids just add a whole nother element to marriage. We see so many couples struggle, including us. Our struggle was really when the kids were little, and not even around some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. It's just exhausting to have children, even though they're the miracle of life and it's beautiful and amazing. They add so much to your family. It's just hard. And then during the empty nest season, when couples have really they're great at co-parenting together, but they're not great at being married anymore because they lost touch of why they even love each other. And it's
Well, if you stay together just for the kids, and then when the kids leave, then you don't even know each other anymore because you never invested in your relationship. It was all about the kids.
And we saw a couple, they had a love seat and they had chairs. And it was like when you're in that love seat together, working on your marriage together versus when you're in, it's me time in those chairs. It's, you could only sit in there by yourself. And you're great. Like you're in the love seat when it comes to parenting. But man, as soon as you get out of parenting, you're in the me seat, in the sex, romance, money, in-laws, whatever that looks like. And it's really getting back to that love seat and communicating together. And I've seen so many couples struggle with this. One parent wants their kids to do travel sports, maybe. And that's expensive, man, because we had a daughter who did that. She played volleyball. And one parent doesn't think they should do that. Rec league is enough. Or one parent wants to spend so much on a budget for a vehicle. And one parent doesn't want to do that. Or who's going to watch the kids, or both people going to work, and who's going to do childcare? Where's that coming from? What kind of school are you going to have? Are you going to pay for private school or not pay for private school? Kids,
there's a lot of big decisions with your kids that you have to agree on.
How do you discipline them? We've really seen some problems in relationships where discipline, there's even no respect amongst the parents of how they're going to discipline, much less them being on the same page to make sure their kids have boundaries and their kids have understanding of what's right and what's wrong, because the parents can't even align on that. And talk about confusing for kids. So bam, get on the same page as your spouse. Kids and expectations around what you want will destroy your marriage probably almost faster than almost anything else. And then now we got kids who've been traumatized because they have parents that are divorced. And there's a whole nother set of things and ways that you have to work through the issues that come with that you can mitigate by having these conversations up front around your kids.
Right. So I'm going to we talked a little bit about the in-laws, extended family. So also holidays and celebration, because, this is a big one for me because I'm really big on holidays. And it's always been a family thing for me. So I had this expectation that holidays will always revolve around the family. And I've grown to realize that not everyone shares that same view as I do. So, we had some things where, at least for me growing up, we did always, like, on a lot of the big holidays like Christmas and Easter, we would travel to see my family, and we spent it with all our family. My husband comes from a blended family, so he didn't have the same thing around that, where they didn't necessarily share holidays, or
that
not all.
dynamic was different.
Yeah, it's very different. And also because his parents are divorced and there were kids with different partners, he has half siblings, and so it's hard to spread that sometimes, where or even just in a partnership, like some of you have to divide that with, okay, we spend Christmas with my family, we spend Easter with your family, or some of you have to do
changing Christmas every other year,
or even trying to visit both on the same holiday. Like, sometimes you have to divide that if you live in the same town and they're all expecting to see you, because a lot of families feel very strongly about who spends holidays with who, and the celebrations, and some cultures feel very strongly about that it is all about the family, and they're expecting that. Like, a lot of people, their parents are expecting that they're going to be celebrating it with them, or so there can be a lot of arguments around that. We've had it ourselves.
Yeah. Well, it's what that one quote say, where questions people ask. We can go see your parents and spend time with them. I'm totally okay with that once we're done with mine.
Yeah, or they just assume their family's more important because it's their family.
Because you love your family. It comes from a good place, but it's rooted negatively with the expectations that they have of you coming to visit, and you have of I'm first.
And of course, we all want to spend it with our family, but we have to compromise and realize, like, your spouse wants to see their family also. So, and we've done that sometimes, where it's like, one year we did, because we're living on this coast now with his family, and so I don't see mine. And like, one year we decided we'd fly out and see mine on Christmas because we didn't ever get to spend Christmas with them anymore. So anyway, you see where I'm going with this. And also things like sometimes like Valentine's Day. Some people don't believe in celebrating it at all.
No, birthdays. Some people got a birthday month, Steph. Some people got their birthday. that they don't care about at all.
Right. And there's some people who grew up, they didn't have that celebrated, so they don't really, we know someone like that like their birthday was never celebrated, so they don't make a big deal about it, but their partner does. So then and then they're expecting you're going to return the same, like you're going to treat my birthday the way I treated yours, and it doesn't always work out that way. So these are all discussions that have to happen.
But it's implied. The problem is with that, I went all out for your birthday. I made your birthday a big deal because to me, birthdays are a big deal. And then they don't say what they want for their birthday. They don't explicit expectations, right? They don't explicitly say it. They expect their spouse to just know, but their spouse doesn't think birthdays are that big of a deal, and they don't do anything. And now that person's left dejected and
right. And they're going to be taking it personal when it may not have been personal at all, really. That's just what they know or how they are.
So the next one is chores. Do you decide to divide up your house based upon gender roles or maybe not? For us, I always took care of the yard. Steph always took care of the inside of the house. For us, we chose for Steph to stay at home with the kids.
Yeah, we kind of follow the traditional gender roles.
We chose for Steph to stay at home with the kids. She wanted that. I wanted that. Nobody's going to take better care of your kids than the mom, not even the dads, 99% of the time. And so...
But we know in today's day and age that's not necessarily the case.
Right. But, do people work, and then there kind of needs to be a different kind of split there, and there needs to be more equity in your relationship at that point. So I think there's so many aspects with chores. You got to find what works for you, and you got to communicate, and then you got to speak up, because maybe some seasons you got it and it's easy. Boom. I got it. I've got time. And the next season of life, work's crazy and it's just super busy. I know when I was in corporate still, we had a certain time of year end is what we called it. And for 3 months, it was bananas. I couldn't do a lot then. And because I was working 12 hours a day. So we chose in those moments to have somebody come take care of the yard, which was my responsibility. But instead of having Steph's mowed the yard a couple times, instead of having her out there, we just said, there's so much going on right now. You can't burden the whole load, Steph. It's not fair to you. I just don't have the time, and I'm exhausted when I do. I don't want to spend time doing that. I'd rather spend it doing something else. We're just going to pay somebody. And if you can afford to do that, do that. Otherwise, what split and what tempo and what day, and how does that look for you in an equitable distribution of what the just maintaining your household looks like?
Right. Because there's a lot of people that both are working. And so then it's got to be a little bit more shared or 50-50. And next we're going to say organized versus disorganized. And I just told you guys I'm OCD. So obviously I was very organized. And honestly, Walt is actually pretty organized too. I have to give him credit for that. Like, he's not a super messy person.
But y'all, Steph takes it to another level though. I can't get on her level when it comes to how organized and everything got a place.
Yes, I'm meticulous about it. But I also understand that not everybody is that way. Like, I totally see, and I don't get upset about other people not being that way. I just have learned that that's how I like it, and I'll do it for my family, my house, but I don't expect him or the kids to live up to that. Like, I don't expect that from them.
Like when we leave the house, tell them, like, you got this thing every time we leave.
I have to straighten like all the pillows, and everything has to be orderly. Like, I didn't like toys being out, and like, so I spend a lot of time doing that, but I also understand like not everybody cares about that, and that's okay. And that's the kind of compromises we have to make, that, we have to understand sometimes other people are not going to be the same as us when it comes to organization. We have even our two girls, one of them was always very organized and the other one was very messy. And, even the organized one now isn't as organized, like it changed. So,
well, and what's cool is at one point, I love to be on time. It's just my thing. If you're, on time, you're late. If you're 5 minutes early, you're on time. Stephanie, she doesn't put a lot of equity into that necessarily, right? And so Steph would come out and she needs the house to be a certain way. What if somebody comes over? She's like, I just need to feel better. Like, it makes me feel good to leave the house and things are in their place. So because we had a conversation about that, I realized, okay, well, what can I do as a spouse? One, so we can be more on time. Two, what can I do to help her? So I'll go around and I'll do some of that stuff before we leave now. And then she doesn't have to do it. And then we just bounce when she comes out and she's ready. Or sometimes she still goes because I didn't, chop the middle pillow down the middle to get that little thing and the little U in there. You know what I'm talking about stuff. Okay. And then the next thing is entertainment vacations. Holy crap, man. Like we've all got different things that we like. We all need our individual things that we like, but there's so many people. What looks like a date night for one doesn't look like a date night for the other. What looks like some people specifically, one spouse wants to go on vacations. The other one doesn't like to travel. They want the staycation. Do you like camping or do you like the beach? Do you like tropical or do you like the mountains? We have another friends that we've known for years. One really likes the beach. The other one burns at the beach. They'd rather be in a mountain cabin with the lake going fishing. And so how do you find the middle ground to make sure both people feel fulfilled in the relationship and both people feel like they get an opportunity to do the entertainment vacation stuff that fills their cup? It can't just be you and what you want all the time. Otherwise, you're just selfish.
That has like differing, like you like the beach, the other one doesn't, then you have to take turns. Maybe like one vacation is at the beach, the other is what the other person wanted, and they're in the mountains, whatever that is. You take turns. Or if you like a staycation, do one that's a staycation, do one that you travel. Like you guys have to find the compromise in that and not expect that it's going to be your way every time.
Yeah. And because it's really about creating experiences and having fun together, ultimately, right? So find an opportunity and get outside your own comfort zone to do something different. Because if you do that, you might find out that it was actually pretty fun.
Or even like my parents, my dad loves sports, my mom doesn't. So he enjoys doing athletic things, she doesn't. So they have to find a way that like she liked to go to musicals, or so they have to take turns, or just decide that that's going to be your thing. And I'll let you do that with the fellas or something. And then, or you have a girls' night to do that. And we'll do something different that we both enjoy.
But they both like to go take a car ride up into the mountains.
Right.
So they did stuff, they found stuff because they communicated with things that they both enjoyed, and they make those experiences happen where they're still spending that quality time as a couple.
So the next one's communication. Walt and I are polar opposites sometimes on this, where one of you's a talker, the other one's more quiet. And and even how you process things, like, are you someone who has to talk it out to like get your feelings or your thoughts out there? Or are you someone who like is more of a meditator or prayer, or like you like to internally think about how you process things? We can be really different on this. Walt's definitely the talker.
Not that you could tell it on the podcast, Steph.
I'm a little more quiet. I am a little more, like I always say, he's extrovert, I'm introvert. How we recharge our batteries is even different. I like to take quiet time to reflect and things like that. He likes to talk through his stuff. Like, so we do have sometimes a very different communication style when it comes to those type of things. How we go about getting to a resolution on something or anything like that is, so you kind of have to learn to respect what your partner might be different than you when it comes to that, and not expect that they're going to, if you're the person that's very vocal about stuff and your partner isn't, and you get upset about that because you're expecting them to communicate the same way as you're going to get disappointed, and you're going to feel, you have to like understand and figure out how they are. So if you know that they're not good at communicating that, they're not going to vocalize it, then you need to maybe ask the right kind of questions to get them to tell you, or give them the space to process that and then come back to you, or whatever that is. And sometimes even if we're expecting them to be vocal about it because they normally are and they aren't, don't get upset about that, because you expected something that maybe they weren't just weren't ready to talk about it yet, or whatever it is.
Yeah. And the thing is, you can't control their reaction, but you can control your own and your own emotions and the empathy that you have and the way that you communicate. You can't expect them to respond a certain way, because We all respond to things differently, and the day can make our response different that we had, much less the experiences that we've had in our life, which is huge in this 10th one. That's your conflict
Yeah, I feel
style.
like these kind of, I almost went into number 10 unintentionally just talking about communication.
Well, that's because you're more of a talker than you are quiet now. Got him. See what I did there? So this 10th one, though, avoider, your conflict style. Are you a avoider or pursuer? So early on in our relationship,
I always say confrontational or non-confrontational. That's how I usually put it.
Yeah, and that works too. And early on in our relationship, Stephanie was very non-confrontational. She avoided it. She needed time to go kind of decompress and get her emotions together and get herself together so that we can have a fruitful conversation. I was opposite. I was the pursuer. I'm more confrontational. Now I want to talk about this. Let's just get everything out in the open. Let's have the conversation we need to have. 7 minutes later, I won't even be mad about it anymore. Once I get to say what I need to say in this conversation. And I was super direct. Stephanie was more passive. Thank God she wasn't passive aggressive. Like, no, I'm fine. Okay. I'm fine. Do whatever you want to. Do whatever you want. That's so passive aggressive, because if I go do whatever I want, you're going to be more pissed when I get back. You could just go. I don't care. Yes, you do. And so don't be passive aggressive. But and this is where the beauty and the growth is. Now we're really kind of in the middle. There's sometimes Stephanie will be more the pursuer. And for me, I'm not avoiding as much as I am. It's just not even that serious. We're totally being petty right now about this. And I'll go to walk away and she's like, where are you going? Now I'm thrown off, because in 24 years together, you've only walked away like 5 times. And it's just walking away to diffuse the moment for me now, where I'll even tell her, it's not even that serious. Like, we're arguing over something so stupid right now and so petty right now. Let's just take a second and we'll come back. That was her telling me that back in the day. So we've really gotten in the middle. What we've learned, though, in our conflict style is that we both became more direct about having the conversations before resentment builds and that pettiness builds and the frustration builds. And we have the conversation way earlier, to where all the emotion behind it isn't so heavy as it once was. And I think that's helped us.
Right. Like, we learned each other's conflict style. Like, when we actually recognize this, that there's a difference in how we handle conflict, we learned how to be more respectful of each other in what each one of us needed. Like, he started to recognize I needed my space, and so he'd give me my space, or vice versa. And it's really crazy because over time we have rubbed off on each other, to where now we're both a little bit more like the other person, where I've gotten a little more direct and he's taken a step back. And I have to tell you, a couple of times, like he said, it threw me off, where I was like, where are you going? Like,
it's me. You got to pee or something real quick, because I know you ain't walking away. But you know what I learned, Steph, especially in the conflicts and what expectations did, and how I really had unrealistic expectations, and how I would take all these painful moments in my life and they would be packaged up into this silly moment that should have been something we could laugh about, but turned into a bigger argument. Nobody wins in the argument. If your goal is to be right, and your goal is to justify your perspective, and your goal is to not compromise and not hear your spouse and not help them feel seen and heard, not have any empathy, both people lose. There's not one person that wins in that kind of an environment. And it took me years to kind of figure that out, versus me just trying to be right all the time. You've got to really take a look at those things, dig deeper than just the moment that's happening in your relationship, especially with conflict, and see where the pain or that visceral reaction or that lashing out with your mouth comes from. And then really work on those spaces that you need to heal from, and really be honest and vulnerable with your spouse of where those come from, so they can get context. They can maybe approach you in a little bit of a different way, but realize the conflict isn't meant for there to be a winner. The conflict is meant for an opportunity for growth. Now that something has come up that both of you guys realize needs some attention.
good point. Our next one's spiritual. And we've talked about this on a previous episode quite a bit, but so I won't go too much into it. But like, is one of you going to be a spiritual leader in your relationship? Is one of you feel more strongly about your spirituality, and maybe you lead the other person into what your spirituality is? And sometimes there's people coming to the relationship from different religions, and you really have to work that out. Like, are you going to somehow compromise and one of you is going to become more one religion than the other, or you know decide where you're going to go to church? Walt and I have dealt with a lot of this because we kind of both came from, I was raised Catholic. He didn't, he had, his only experience was a little bit of Catholic from his grandmother. And so he didn't necessarily have a religion. And
Mm-hmm.
when we came together, we both kind of felt like, and I wasn't really married to the Catholic religion either. I felt
We're
like,
more spiritual than we were religious.
and so we ended up kind of being like, well, let's just, we had a friend who was very spiritual that kind of had an influence on us, and he got us to go to his church. And we were kind of just open to trying different things and trying to find what would fulfill us, because we were both kind of searching for something more spiritually, but we didn't know exactly what. And then we had another friend that kind of influenced that. And so ultimately, we ended up kind of agreeing on one, following a certain type of spirituality. Um, but we really did kind of just compromise and come together on that. Not because one of us was like really strongly like, oh, it has to be this.
Yeah.
But we know some people who are, they come in and they've really been raised in something, and that's really what they believe in, and
Mm-hmm.
they're very strong in it. And it's very hard to be with someone who's not, if you
Yeah.
are. So those kind of conversations really need to happen. And it is for a lot of people, it's a big part of who they are and
Mm-hmm.
how they view things, their values, everything. So, I mean, I do think that's a pretty big one. And some people aren't following anything. So, but those things do shape you in a big way. I mean, it is your morals and your values and what you believe in, and it's going to be how you raise your kids. It's going to play into a big relationship. Uh, it can be a big relationship killer if you have expectations that your partner is going to be a certain way spiritually and they're not.
All right, guys. This is finally the 12th most common marriage expectation. So I want you to really think about all the ones we talked about and feel out where you fit in, where your spouse fits in, right? And fill out where maybe there's some conflict so you can have these conversations. The last one's a big one. Work and career. How big do you prioritize your work? Is it about the promotion? Is it about the money? Is it about I'm going to work overtime? Is it going to be about, hey, we're working to live so we can travel, so we can have fun, so we can have nice things? Or are you living to work where you find a lot of validation and you find a lot of purpose within your work? Are you guys willing to even relocate if there's an opportunity? I mean,
Military.
what we relocate maybe 9 times in 20 years, we relocated together. Does work stress spill over into your home life? And it did for us sometimes.
Well, like I knew getting into when we got married, he was in the military. So there was an expectation. I already knew, and I grew up in a military family. So I knew what that entailed. There was an expectation that I'm going to move a lot. I already knew that. But if I wasn't aware of that, it could have become a big issue.
Yeah. Is both people going to work full time? Right. Because then you got to go back to kids and how you're going to raise your kids and how you're going to spend the money. So does stress spill over, which happened for us sometimes. Sometimes work was just bananas, man. And I was stressed. And, Steph's telling me they're walking around on eggshells, not because I cussed or yelled or anything like that, just because my tone sucked and my attitude kind of sucked. And those were hard for me to hear when I was putting everything that I could into life. But here's the thing, especially about work, and I want to make sure people hear this, especially the men out there. 3 generations from now, nobody's going to really know who we are. All the things we bought, all the money we had, all of those things, like nobody's going to know that. Your kids are going to celebrate you as their parents. Your grandkids are going to celebrate you. One day we're going to be a picture on a bureau somewhere or on some sort of table somewhere. And then the next generation isn't going to have that. And they're going to have to continue to build. So you can create a legacy, but the legacy isn't formed in your career. They're going to remember the experiences, the way you made them feel. You're never going to regret going to your kid's game. You're never going to regret taking your daughter to a daddy-daughter dance. You're never going to regret leaving work so you can go on a date with your spouse. Prioritize the things that are important. But where work and career comes into your marriage, you got to really talk about what the expectations around that look like. Sometimes it's levels of ambition. I'm blessed that Stephanie supported so much because my ambition was through the freaking roof. And I needed somebody that could hold things down where I could focus on that and not feel neglected. But there's been times when I went on deployments. There's been times when I was working 12-hour days. There's been times she's had to pick up a lot of slack because my focus was on work. And I could get really defensive if it was ever placed to me in a way where you're not prioritizing us, you're prioritizing work. And let's be real, I did do that sometimes, chasing promotions and money and those things. It's only in hindsight that I realized it now.
Yeah, I was thinking of we watched that show, The Lincoln Lawyer. I don't know if any of you watch it, but he's married to his work, and they ended up divorced. And but you can tell through the show that he still like really loves his wife and child, and that really actually was a priority. It's just he couldn't let go of that. Like work is just his thing, and it leads to a lot of divorce because if you are married to your work, then you're not putting into your relationship. So,
and here's the thing, like that level of initiative is applaudable, by the way. So we're not downing that because I have that level of initiative too. Your biggest strength is sometimes your biggest weakness. So in all of these things, some of these things might be a total strength for you, but not for your spouse. And so what we want to talk about is how do you take these common areas of expectations? And we're going to quickly kind of go through this part.
Right. So we had 12 big expectations that we face in marriage. 12. So there's a lot of expectations there. And now we want to talk about how do we keep ourselves from letting the expectations ruin our relationship, and let's avoid that. And so we have like 5 tips on how to combat the expectations, I guess you could say.
And the first one, every podcast episode, you heard me and Stephanie talk about communication. So I think first it's identify for yourself, what are my expectations? Where am I having unrealistic expectations? What, instead of an expectation, can I communicate with my spouse so they know it's a hope and dream of what I want, what I need, how they could better serve me in our relationship? Then stand by and listen. When your spouse says, hey, here's what I want and need, here's what can make our relationship stronger, here's where I kind of have an expectation, maybe, but it really should be formed in the way of a hope. Here's where you could meet me halfway on some of these things. You got to really take a step back, both parties in this, and understand their perspective. And even if you don't necessarily agree, because it's a cultural thing, it's in a family thing, the way that they grew up, it's in a life experience thing that's different for each of you. Where are they coming from? Understand that, keep perspective of it, have some empathy for it, and then try to meet them halfway where they know that you're working towards them and you're not pushing away. That communication is critical. And so, as we always say, listen to this with your partner, because this can open up some dialogue for you guys.
Yeah. So number 2 is be willing to compromise. I've said compromise. I don't even know how many times. Like I'm constantly saying it because that's what a marriage is.
It should be marriage/compromise.
I'm almost like it should be in the name almost, because that's what marriage is. You have to compromise because to be honest, I mean, if you think about it, in your relationship, if your partner comes to you with something or you get in an argument about something and they're just like, well, no, I'm going to do it this way. And they're not willing to hear you out. They don't want to hear your opinion. They just say they're going to do it their way and that's it. Well, where's that going to get you? Divorced.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real. Do you want your partner to act that way? How would you respond if they act that way? And so are you doing that to your partner? Are you the type of person that's like, I'm not even going to hear you on this. Like, this is how it's going to be. Well, that's not being a partner, and that's not being a teammate. That's not being in a relationship. That's a dictatorship where it's your way or the highway. So you can't have a relationship that way.
Yeah. And I think I love that you said that, Steph, because compromise, you can't have a dictatorship and have compromise at the same time. What I will say is this third piece. So be willing to compromise was the second. This third piece, determine what the deal breakers are. So early on in our relationship, like I rode motorcycles with a buddy of mine. I was telling her a story and she said, hey, you can't get a motorcycle if we're together because you don't even have to be driving crazy. Somebody else doesn't. You could hit a piece of debris in the road and die. And I respected that. It wasn't a big deal for me. It wasn't like a deal breaker for me where, no, I'm getting me a motorcycle. Damn, you're not telling me what I can and can't do. And we both maybe like 2 or 3 times in our whole marriage and our whole 26-year relationship.
Well, at least I think I conveyed that it was because I care about him, because I don't want anything to happen to him because I love him. And that scares me to death that he could die if he was riding them, especially because there was a traumatic experience for me when I was like 8 or 9 years old that never left me. I witnessed a motorcycle accident where someone died. And so I explained all that to him so he would understand where I was coming from with that.
Yeah, maybe it could be back to the spiritual aspect where spirituality is huge for you. So not having a spouse participate in that is a deal breaker. You got to have those conversations. It's different than a dictatorship and you're going to do everything the way that I want. That's what I expect. A subservient human being as my partner. That's not a partnership, right? Again, that's a dictatorship. But you will have some deal breakers, some things that you need to talk to your, maybe before you get married, you should have these conversations, but it does evolve. And then there should be some respect and some compromise by both parties to meet somewhere in the middle. And the way you have a conversation about that, so back to number 1, communications, and the way you compromise will allow you to move forward together arm in arm and keep your relationship strong.
Yeah, so number 4 is you're a team, collaborate together. And this kind of is, I think, works with the compromise piece I talked about for this.
Weird. You mean when you're married, you're a team? Wow.
And I think that, we have a friend who's actually one of Walt's mentors. And I always loved that he always referred to families like, so when he would see us, he would say, how's Team McKinley? And he would always refer to us as teams, even his own. He'd always say the team in the last name because, as a marriage or even as a family, you are a team. And that's really how we should view it is, are we being a team player? Are we being a teammate? Are we sharing in the responsibilities? Are we sharing how we feel about these different, aspects of what affects our family? And be solution focused, not problem focused. Don't always just focus on the problem and talk about how we never do this and we never do that. And you point out all the bad things and, everything is you always do that or you never help me with this. And if you approach things in that way to your partner, they're not going to receive it.
Right. Because you're blaming them.
Yeah. They're just going to tune out and be like, I can't even talk to you about this because you're not even seeing the whole picture.
Don't treat them like they're your mortal enemy, like your adversaries.
Like you can voice that, hey, I feel like this is happening. Maybe we could do this instead and bring them a solution, or what you think is a solution, and then talk about it and hear their side and how they think they would want to deal with it and then reach some kind of compromise and work as a team.
Yeah, amen to that. Number 5 is have gratitude and celebrate each other's differences. I remember that movie, The Stepford Wives, years ago, and all the wives in this neighborhood were the exact same. And everybody acted the exact same. Everybody spoke the exact same, made decisions the exact same. That sucks, man. I don't know about you. I don't want somebody to just be a robot. I married somebody who can help me grow. I married my partner in crime. I married somebody I can have fun with and create a relationship and be my best friend in our relationship. And although we haven't always felt like best friends, right? We always still were. There was always love there. There was always compassion. There was always empathy. We just allowed ego and pain and hurt to get in the way sometimes. And the moments when I stopped being thankful for the things that she did in our marriage and I started focusing on the things that she didn't, the moment I started wanting everything my way and expecting it to go in the direction that I wanted, instead of appreciating that she's different than me and she thinks different. And wow, what a crazy idea that maybe I can learn something for her. The moment I went from those negative, problem-focused pieces of my mind, and I focused on being grateful for her and being grateful for the differences and the things she does do. And wow, what a change in our relationship. Where now we're literally the happiest we've ever been. and we have a blast and we spend more time together than we ever have. And so, look, we went over 12 different ways that expectations put stress on your relationship and strain on your relationship. We gave you 5 ways that you can start working on them now. Don't hesitate. Stop playing small in your relationship. Stop letting your pride get in the way of such a beautiful journey you can be on with your life partner, with the person that you chose to marry, for better or for worse. Dig all the way in. Dig all the way in and have the conversation and come to a compromise somewhere in the middle that allows both of you to move forward together.
Yeah, you guys. So, like I said, expectations, ooh, they can really be relationship killers, but they don't have to be. And we all have expectations, and that's normal, and we should have them. There are certain things you can expect in your relationship, and I think there's things you should expect. You should expect love and respect and trust and those type of things to feel safe. Those things can be expected and should be expected. It's the things that are, you're expecting unrealistic things from your partner, that they're going to think the same way as you and they'll do things the same way as you, when in reality it's not that way. Like I said, I was unrealistic with the folding of the towels. How could I expect that he's going to fold the exact same way as me? He's never going to do that. I mean, let's be real. So I just think, really look at your expectations, like really think on, what kind of things am I expecting from my spouse? And is that realistic? Is it realistic or unrealistic? And then taper those expectations, like take them back a notch and, realize like, hey, maybe I had an unrealistic expectation. Maybe it's because I was raised this way and I just thought that that's how it should be. But I realize you weren't raised that way. And so I can't expect that from you. And, like I said, I think the biggest thing you can expect love and respect. Expect that in your relationship, and that's okay.
Or at least make it a requirement.
Yeah.
Make it a requirement. We all need to have requirements, and we all deserve to have both of those things too. So look, guys, every episode we're going to recommend, go listen to this with your partner. This will open up more dialogue in your relationship and help you grow your relationship so much easier than you just trying to take pieces and chunks of it. Go listen to it together and talk about what you learned, and talk about your expectations now. Talk about your requirements. As always, join the Legacy Driven Marriages community on Instagram and Facebook. It's just at Legacy Driven Marriages. Super simple. Get involved with other couples in the arena of their relationships, fighting to be the best version of themselves and change their generational legacies. And so until the next time,
keep loving each other, keep elevating your legacy, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
see you guys later.